Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our launch of the Prepared Research Project. It's wonderful to have so many of you joining us today. My name is Eleanor Flynn. I'm a professor of law and the director of the Centre for Disability Law and Policy, and I'm also the scientific coordinator of this new project. I'll be telling you more about the project as the day goes on. But first, I just wanted to welcome all of our guests and all of our speakers to today's session. And we're going to commence proceedings in a moment with a video recorded by our colleague Ima Plasencia Pereiro. Ima is the European Union representative on the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and has a long track record of working within the EU Commission on issues related to disability rights, including accessibility and especially the EU Accessibility Act. So Ima has been a long-standing advocate for disability rights in this context, and it is appropriate that she gives us this welcome video to commence our project and our work together in this space. So in a moment, we're going to have Ima's welcome address, and then I'll come back to tell you more about the project. Don't have audio yet for Ima, so we might need to restart this video.
Let me start thanking Eleanor and the colleagues for the invitation to this very interesting meeting of today. I am very sorry that I cannot connect online or even be with you, because this is the very first time that I am attending the CRPD committee session, and as you can imagine, I cannot miss it. It is really great to see the advancement in the implementation of the CRPD in countries around the world. But let me focus on the EU and share with you some of the experiences and reflections that I have had advancing EU disability policies. It is important to see that and great to see that under the Marie Curie program, training of researchers on disability remains ongoing. It provides a good opportunity to strengthen knowledge and capacity on disability, which is very much needed. This event, kicking off the Prepared project, reflects on the need to have disability-inclusive policies and targeted measures to address the rights and needs of persons with disabilities in the EU. I know that there is a lot of competition to get a Marie Curie project, and I congratulate all of you for having achieved this. Well, the issue of responding to disability inclusive policies is not always the responding to new challenges, like artificial intelligence or environmental matters. There are many long-standing issues that still need to be addressed, for which sound and effective policies based on evidence remain an urgent necessity. Let me name a few of them. For example, independent living and deinstitutionalization. We still know very little about the numbers of people living in institutions, the situation, how is their life there, the barriers that they face, the rights, enjoyment of the rights, but also more material matters are the costs. So policymakers can make informed decisions. Beyond the early 2000 Deadlock study on the costs of comparing costs of support at home and living in institutions, there are not much comprehensive research in that area. Also, another example is employment, for which for 15 years we have a persistent gap between the employment levels of persons with and without disabilities. Many measures have been taken all around Europe and around the globe, but this gap persists, and there is still lack of knowledge of why closing this gap is not a reality. Another example is disability assessments to access, often used to access benefits that should follow a human rights approach. How to do that? How to make sure that these assessments stop reflecting the old medical model. But there are many other challenges: political participation, access to justice, access to information, and many more. In all those areas, we miss data on the situation of the policies of persons with disabilities, but also data that reflect on the effect of the public policies and legislation on individuals with disabilities and their families. We need to find data to convince policymakers to adopt new measures, but new measures that would be effective to bring the necessary change and remove barriers to equality. Measures that would implement the convention, but also the effect that the convention pursues. As new global challenges come, the lack of prevention of barriers faced by persons with disabilities remain. It is sometimes surprising to see how the lack of prevention is repeated in policy areas and new developments. This is very much evident in the area of technologies, where, in the 90s, we became aware of the barriers in user interfaces, in functionality, in relation to inaccessible TVs and video recorders. Same issues were repeated a decade later in the transition to graphical user interfaces. Similarly, when the web was being developed, the similar accessibility barriers were still present, although we had already a good knowledge of what needed to be done. Now we are facing the new era of artificial intelligence, and yet there we see that there is a threat of being excluding persons with disabilities. And this is just naming a few examples. Well, this reflects one more on the importance of informed policy making and the role of researchers and research and data. We regularly use in policy making ANET, our research network, ANET, old ANET, EDE, data as a tool to advance on disability policies, to gather data, analyzing effects of existing policies, reflecting on their impact on individuals with disabilities, and recommending new measures. In fact, the need for capacity is growing, and there is an increasing number of policy domains in which the EU is embedding disability matters. And we need to have then disability consequently reflected in the legislation and related legislation and policies. Disability specific areas, of course, also require more data and attention. Let me mention the recently adopted European Disability Card that for the first time recognizes, is a tool that managed to recognize disability status across EU member states. But other areas like access to justice, both in procedural matters, but also in legal capacity, in areas of transport, health, development cooperation, enlargement, digital services, and children's rights, for example, disability and accessibility is being mainstreamed. Hence, that increased need for capacity of professionals working in all those areas. One of the biggest challenges is to collect data related to persons with disabilities in those and each of every particular area or sector, and qualify and quantify the impacts in economy, in society, in environment, in competitiveness and fundamental rights, in technological developments when new measures are going to be adopted. We are bound to do impact assessments, and those need to be based on an analysis of the impact of the different policies. There is also an increasing need to build capacity for the implementation of the CRPD in the EU disability policies. For example, training legal practitioners on the rights of persons with disabilities or engineers on accessibility. We are facing a clear evolution on disability policies. The momentum of the CRPD is still requiring a policy change and legislative developments. In that context, it is important to go beyond principles and put in place concrete and practical measures and disability-relevant provisions in legal instruments that will tackle the barriers in an effective way. For doing so, knowledge is needed not only about disability matters, but also about the effectiveness of existing laws in that area, what works and what has failed, and capacities building on a specialized knowledge of disability related to the issues and the sector in which those measures are being taken. General knowledge about social policies and human rights is not enough. A genuine multidisciplinary approach is required. Take the example of financial legislation, very complex, and is affecting all of us. How can one legislate on accessibility provisions to make sure that persons with disabilities enjoy the same rights than the rest of the population without understanding what are the financial instruments involved? Credits, payments, accounts, insurance, pension funds, collective investments, but at the same time, knowledge about digital privacy, security of transactions, and accessibility. This multidisciplinary approach is really, and knowledge is really more and more needed. To finish, let me share with you that I'm really happy to see how the initiative that Jerry Queen took many years ago to invest in capacity of university students to address disability policies, to build the next generations of professionals on disability is now continuing with Eleanor and all the colleagues involved in the projects, the partners to this project. Let me just finish by encouraging all of you to use this opportunity that this project is offering you to enhance your competencies and hopefully with your dedication contribute to build a more disability inclusive Europe and world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma, for that wonderful introduction to our work and reminder of the importance of continuing research on disability rights and scholarship within the EU and globally as well. So we had some reminders of the important challenges that research should try to tackle in this domain when it comes to accessibility, information, communication, and participation in society. And with that, I would now like to take the opportunity to tell you more about our project and how it will work over the next few years. So I'm going to share some slides now with a presentation that will outline some of the main information that you need to understand about the project and ways in which people can get involved in our work. So What is the Prepared project? So, Prepared stands for Progressive Research Enabling Policy Action to Respond and Educate on Disability. So, what we aim to do with this project is to ensure that we have disability inclusive responses to some of the major global challenges that we're facing. And I'll talk about some examples of what that could include in a moment. This is a postdoctoral research project. As Emma mentioned, it has funding from the Marie Curie Sklodowska Actions, and it also has funding from the university partners involved and from the Wellspring Foundation. So what we're seeking to do in this project is to recruit postdoctoral researchers. We're interested in researchers from any discipline, as long as their work is informed by or in conversation with the ideas of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And one of the reasons we chose to apply for a postdoctoral network this time is building on the success of, Emma mentioned, our previous Marie Curie actions, where we had two different training networks for PhD researchers in the past. Those were the DREAM network and the DARE network. And we have trained various researchers through that process, and we're very proud of the research that they have undertaken in those projects. And we felt that now is the time to move beyond opportunities for PhDs, because we have at least these two cohorts of PhD students who have completed their work, and what opportunities exist for them to advance that work now at the postdoctoral level. So we really wanted to create the opportunities for the PhDs to go further, and not just those who, of course, have joined us in those projects, many of whom have gone on to careers in different areas, but for the next generation of PhD graduates to continue their work in disability scholarships. So, how will the project work? Well, we have three partners who are employing postdoctoral researchers. So that is ourselves, the Centre for Disability Law and Policy at the University of Galway. We also have the University of Lisbon, where the ISCSP, which is an institute, higher institute for political and social research, will have host and employ a researcher, and also our colleagues at Swiss Paraplegic Research are joining us in employing a researcher, a postdoctoral researcher in this prepared project. We will be employing 6 postdoctoral researchers in total, but at the moment we've only opened call 1, in which we will employ a maximum of 3 postdoctoral researchers, and the remaining 3 will be employed when we open call 2 next year. As with many Marie Curie actions, our researchers will have the opportunity to do secondments. So we are really interested in research that has a practical application that can actually affect change, whether that's in policy and law reform or impacting on some grassroots activity of disabled people's organizations, for example. So we have, at present, we have 11 secondment partners, and those are across a range of academic institutions and civil society organizations. And the goal is that all of our researchers will do at least one secondment to gain new information and knowledge and skills that they might not have in their employing organization, and hopefully to apply the ideas that they're working on in a practical context with one of our secondment partners. So I've mentioned our colleagues who are employing already, but just to remind you, so the positions available are in Ireland at the University of Galway, in Portugal at the University of Lisbon, and in Switzerland at Swiss Paraplegic Research. And on this slide, I have listed our secondment partner organizations, which are Validity Foundation, the Independent Living Institute, the European Disability Forum, Inclusion International, Fight for Right in Ukraine, CBM Global, the Disability Rights Fund, the European Network on Independent Living, the Hungarian Centre for Social Sciences, the University of Lucerne, and Maastricht University. So you'll see we really have a wide range of options for our researchers to gain new skills and apply their knowledge through these secondment partner organizations, but we can also add new secondment partners throughout the project. So if a researcher wants to do a secondment with a very specific organization that's not listed here, and it really meets their research needs, then as long as the organization can meet some requirements from the EU side, we will be able to add them as a secondment partner. So The way this project works is that we have a broad theme, which is our need to develop disability inclusive responses to the most pressing global issues of our time. Call 1 is open now. And as I've said, we'll recruit up to 3 fellows in that call who can be employed in Ireland, Portugal, or Switzerland. And it's up to the fellows to think of their own idea that fits our theme and develop a research proposal that relates to the broader theme. But they have a lot of freedom to develop their ideas about what do you see as a pressing global challenge and one where a disability perspective is missing. We will, as I mentioned, open a second call next year. And again, we plan to recruit 3 fellows under the same conditions. Fellows will have 3-year contracts and must do a secondment, as I've mentioned, with one of our partner organizations during that time. And we can add new organizations for secondment if needed. So this is just a flavor of some of the issues, and you'll hear more from our available supervisors in the project later on in the webinar about their topics and the areas that they're interested, particularly in receiving proposal on. But just to give you an idea of some of the issues which we see as very pressing global challenges where a disability inclusive response is badly needed, these would include climate justice, and that includes measures to address climate change in law and policy, which often do not consider disabled people's perspectives, even though disabled people are significantly impacted by climate change, as we know. So we're really interested in hearing proposals on that topic. Also, of course, reproductive freedom is under attack around the world and is being rolled back in many different countries and contexts. And this has a knock-on impact on disabled people's reproductive freedom as well. So we're interested in research that addresses that challenge. The proliferation of war throughout the world, armed conflict, apartheid, and genocide is a serious concern, and one that, again, the disability perspective is often missing in. We want to hear about how movements for social justice need to incorporate disability perspectives as an intersectional approach in their work. So whether that's movements for climate justice, movements for gender justice, or in any other area in which progress is attempting to be made, where is the disability perspective in that work? Emma already mentioned assistive technology being a significant support for disabled people's participation in society and in the workforce, and also artificial intelligence as both an opportunity and a threat to the autonomy of disabled people, among others, who may draw on this type of AI for various purposes, but at what risks and what costs, and how does that impact disabled people? We might say that in the global order, there is a crisis of human rights more broadly. So how does the conversation about disability and justice fit into that broader conversation? We can see that there are threats to the rule of law and democracy throughout the world. And how are disabled people's experiences being accommodated or considered as we respond to those threats? There is a significant increase in the type of migration that we're seeing globally, the numbers of refugees and asylum seekers throughout the world. How are disabled refugees and asylum seekers being accommodated and supported throughout that process? We're also obviously in an era of late-stage capitalism and resurgence of neoliberalism, and we need to think about those issues and how they relate to the experiences of disabled people as well. We might also say we are experiencing in many of our countries a resurgence of far-right politics, and we have to consider the impact that that has on disabled people's lives and the value that we ascribe to disabled people's lives and well-being and their participation in society, as well as disaster preparedness, which can be connected to climate justice, but can also include other types of humanitarian disasters, armed conflict, and so on. So this is not an exhaustive list, but it is just to give you an idea of some of the topics that we would be interested in proposals on. But it is not limited to these topics. We are interested in receiving any proposals that you can make a good case for being a global challenge that requires a disability inclusive response. So what do you need to remember if you want to apply for one of these postdoctoral fellowships? Well, the first thing that I should say is that as their postdoctoral fellowships, people need to either already have their PhD right now, or they need to be able to confirm that they will have passed successfully their PhD defense or Viva examination and met all the criteria for the PhD prior to the application deadline for this call. If you want to apply in call 1, that's the 16th of April. So you need to have met all the requirements for the award of your PhD by that date in order to apply. The other thing that Marie Curie has as a condition for all its programs is mobility. So PhD researchers cannot have been resident in or had their main activity, whether that was work or study, in the country that they are applying to be employed in for more than 12 months in the previous years prior to the application date of the 16th of April. So Irish researchers who are living in Ireland and have been based in Ireland, again, for longer than that 12-month period, would need to be applying to Switzerland or Portugal, for example. Of course, as I've mentioned, the researchers have to develop their own ideas for a research topic. So we are not prescribing what the topic will be, as long as it fits the overall aim of Prepared. And we do encourage researchers to get in contact with us to discuss their ideas, especially if you're not sure if it meets this criteria of again, a disability inclusive response to a global challenge. We have a number of Prepared supervisors who you'll be hearing from shortly that you can contact in order to get support for your proposal. So you must identify one specific supervisor that you want to work with, and remember again to check what country they are based in and ensure that you meet the mobility criteria for that country. You should also then complete the online application form by the 16th of April, making sure that you have all your supporting documentation. So that might be your PhD certificate, as well as all of the proposal documents that we need you to upload. We also have a requirement for English language competency, for example, for this project, as the research will be done in English and the project working language is English. So have everything ready when you go to apply online, and you can check out the templates for all the documents that we want you to use on the Prepared website for your proposal. I will be later on in the webinar, I'm going to take you through what the online application system looks like and give you some advice on how to navigate it. But you can also be checking it out at the project website in advance of that discussion. So what happens if you've gone through the whole process, you've checked all of your eligibility, you've come up with your idea, you've written your proposal, you've got your supervisor on board, and you've submitted your application. What next? So the first thing we'll do is check your eligibility and also conduct some ethics checks on your proposal, particularly for research that is, with human participants and with marginalized communities, including the disability community. We will submit those proposals to a project ethics committee that will conduct a further check to ensure that the project is in line with the EU rules and the institution's rules on conducting ethical research. So that will happen in April after the deadline. We are also then obliged to submit your proposals for peer review. So your proposals are not being reviewed by the proposed supervisors, they're being reviewed by three independent international experts. And we're asking for those peer reviews to be completed in May. And following the peer reviews, your proposal will be allocated scores by your reviewers, and there's a weighting for those scores. You can read more detail about how exactly the scores are calculated on our website in the guide for applicants. Proposals will then be ranked according to their scores, and the top proposals will be shortlisted for interview. And we're hoping that that entire process will be able to happen by starting in May and going on into June. Our goal then is to hold interviews with the shortlisted candidates for each of the employing organizations in June. And following the interviews, the interviewers also allocate scores to the candidates. Those will be combined with their review scores, and then a further ranking of the proposals take place, with the funding decisions being made in July, we hope, with the goal for the fellows then to be able to take up their contracts in September. So this is the timeline. We may have some changes to this timeline. In particular, anyone who has had to chase peer reviewers for any purpose knows that it can be difficult to get reviews back on time. We will do our absolute best to do this in a timely manner, but there may be some delays that are beyond our control. But applicants will be informed of where their application is at each step in the process. So, why should you apply to us? Why consider bringing your research and your ideas to the Prepared project? Well, as you've seen from the partners involved in this project, we have some very unique training and networking opportunities for a new generation of disability rights researchers. We are passionate about research that is evidence-based. We are passionate about making our research have a direct impact on policy, on legislation, and ultimately on the lives of disabled people. So if you are passionate about those things, this is the project for you. You will have some dedicated supervision from both academic and civil society organizations, and the chance to apply your ideas to real world problems. And in doing so, to co-design more inclusive and effective solutions than you might otherwise have the opportunity to do in other more traditional types of postdoctoral research contract. We also, I think, have more generous funding and a longer contract than most typical postdoc opportunities. So most postdoc opportunities and fellowships are typically 1 to 2 years, whereas we're giving our researchers 3 years of a contract. The gross salary for researchers employed on Prepared will be €53,505. That excludes a family allowance. So again, you can read our guide for applicants about the conditions for family allowance for people who are in recognized relationships or have dependents. They can apply for, they will be entitled to a larger salary according to the conditions of the European Commission for this project, which will be a salary of €58,905. That's the gross salary for if those conditions are met. And in addition to the gross salary, then, and obviously researchers are subject to tax and all the other potential deductions that they might have in their employing organizations, depending on the national legislation that's applicable to them. But we will also then be providing, in addition to the salary, contributions towards the research costs. So that would include consumables, travel, and covering the cost of some training and career development activities. So it really is a generous package for researchers compared to many other postdoctoral opportunities. So with that, that is all the information I want to share at this point about the project and why people should apply to engage with the project and how it will work. I should just also say that obviously, if other organizations are interested in getting involved in the project beyond our existing partners, we are still interested potentially in adding new secondment partners. So if that's something that you or an organization you know of might be interested in benefiting from a researcher in this project, then of course, please do get in touch with us and we would be happy to discuss if that is possible. So for now, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and we're going to move into the next section of the webinar, where we will be hearing from the supervisors about the topics that they're particularly interested in having some proposals on. But again, be aware that, of course, we are interested in a broad range of projects beyond what you might hear about today. So don't panic if your topic or your idea doesn't fit these areas. Do find the person who you think is maybe closest to your research and get in contact with them about your idea to learn more. So we're going to begin the Meet the Supervisors session with my colleague Carla Sabiero from the Swiss Paraplegic Research. Over to you, Carla.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. So welcome also from my side to everybody, and thank you very much for your interest in our very interesting, very good project. I would like to say a couple of words about my person. So if you look for myself at the internet, probably you are going to find me easier in the University of Lucerne, but I also work at the Swiss Paraplegic Research. So I have a bridge professorship. This means that I have 2 contracts. I work at the University of Lucerne. There I am a professor for rehabilitation and healthy aging. I'm also vice dean for our Department of Rehabilitation, and I am the director of our Center for Rehabilitation in Global Health Systems, which is a WHO collaborating center. But I also have, and I'm honored to have, a contract with the Swiss Paraplegic Research. And at the Swiss Paraplegic Research, I lead a working group on aging, functioning epidemiology, and implementation research. And the person that is coming to us, the postdocs coming to us, are coming to the Swiss Paraplegic Research. There, I work very closely with Professor Jerome Bickenbach, that many of you might know. It's a big name in the field, and he will be co-supervising the postdoc that comes to us with myself. We have defined 3 areas of interest in the scope of prepared. So 3 areas where we really would welcome proposals. The first one is disability assessment in the scope of disability determination procedures for social benefits. And this would be very important for us for call 1, so for the first run of applicants. You have just heard before, initially here, the starting video, that still we have many countries who have procedures for disability assessment that are following the medical model, that are very much medicalized. And we would like to get out of that. Countries actually would also like to get out of that. And we have, in the past years, had many countries that introduced important reforms to their systems using the International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health as a reference framework, and modernizing, being much more in line with the CRPG, with their new approaches. Professor Bickenbach has supported many of these countries in their reforms, and several good examples are there. But the problem is that these good examples remain in the country where they were done, so where the reforms were done. And we keep getting again and again requests from other countries on examples. So what could be done? How could it be done? How such a reform could look like? And of course, this is very much context dependent. Nevertheless, examples can be very helpful. So we would very much welcome a postdoc who is interested in perhaps evaluating existing experiences, preparing, for example, case studies that can help other countries embarking on these processes to become more in line with the CRPG requirements. The second area of interest is more for call 2, but if you would like to put a proposal also for call 1, you are welcome. But this is really more, we will give it priority to call 2, and it's access to institutionalized long-term care, so outside of the institutions. This is one of my research projects at SPF. And in this project, we show that persons with a spinal cord injury, which, as you know, it's a very complex and very disabling condition, have a lot of problems, a range of problems, receiving long-term care that matches their needs. So they receive long-term care, but not necessarily matching all the needs that they have, especially when we are talking about younger persons, about persons at working age, receiving education. This can be really a problem. And the problems that we see, they are very much linked to system issues, how the health system, how the social system is organized, but also with the policies that are in place, for example, at the moment in Switzerland. So we would very much welcome a postdoc interested in foresight-based policy analysis to explore potential actionable future scenarios that could solve the challenges that we have been observing in Switzerland and also in other countries. The third area of interest, and we have heard at the start of this meeting, the issue of disability statistics, disability data. So this is an area that I have been working with for almost 15 years now, perhaps more. And there are really consistent and continuously problems with how disability is measured for disability statistics. And this really has an impact on the on our ability, on the extent to which we can quantify the true size of inequalities that persons with disability face. So it has really implications, and it has also implications for policymaking, because these numbers that we generate, they are considered. So currently, few countries, for example, use consistently disaggregate data or indicators of the CRPG or indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals by disability, although this has been required. So we have a requirement, do not leave anyone behind, but it looks like we are at danger of leaving, of doing exactly so. So here also in this area, I would very much welcome a postdoc interested on innovative approaches to advance disability statistics, and more important, to use available data, because there is a lot of available data out there to compare, for example, key CRPD indicators across countries in Europe and beyond. Taking into account disability, but also the intersectorality between disability, aging, and for interest of mine is also aging. So this would be very, very important. So these are the three areas of main interest that we have. We would very much welcome applications about these topics, innovative applications, interesting applications that we can consider. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carla. Great to hear about your priorities at Swiss Paraplegic Research. We'll now move on to Paula at the University of Lisbon to hear about your areas of interest as a supervisor. Over to you, Paula.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning at the launch of our new Prepared project. So my name is Paula Campos Pinto, and I am an associate professor of sociology at the Institute for Social and Political Sciences of the University of Lisbon. Currently, I'm the head of the sociology department there, as well as deputy director of the Center for Interdisciplinary Gender Studies and the coordinator of the Disability and Human Rights Observatory. This observatory is a platform that brings together researchers, disability organizations, and policymakers to raise awareness, provide training and advanced education, research and develop policy advice on disability rights and the CRPD in Portugal and Portuguese-speaking countries of Africa, Brazil, and South Asia. Since 2017, the observatory has published an annual report to monitor the implementation of the CRPD in Portugal across 4 key areas: disability-based discrimination, education, employment, and social protection and living conditions. And the data that we gather in this report enable us to also to do comparative analysis in the context of the European Union. So we've been able to track how we are progressing in Portugal in terms of implementation of the various rights of the convention. This work stems from my former involvement with Disability Rights Promotion International, which was a large international project that developed a system to monitor disability rights through participatory methodologies. And that was really an innovative aspect of this project. So in this role, I supported research on disability rights carried out by disability organizations across the world in Africa, South Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Canada. This work is also connected very much to the work I've developed as a member of the core research team of disability, European Disability Expertise, EDE, which used to be the former academic network of European disability experts. This is a pan-European network that collects, analyzes, and provides the European Commission with scientific data relating to national policies, legislation, and the situation of persons with disabilities in the various member states. I have also coordinated numerous national and international research projects related to disability, human rights, gender, and generally the impact of policy on disabled people's lives. My research interests, therefore, lie primarily in disability and human rights, encompassing disability rights monitoring across the 4 areas mentioned: discrimination, education, employment, and social protection and living conditions, including in areas such as independent living, the institutionalization, self-determination, and social participation. I am also very interested in intersection of gender, class, ethnicity, and disability, in countries of the global South and North, as well as on using qualitative methods and participatory research involving persons with disabilities. So in this first call, I look forward to host a postdoc researcher at the observatory in the beautiful city of Lisbon to develop research that will take a disability perspective to address any of these areas mentioned before. I think we at the observatory can offer the opportunity and the conditions for you to develop groundbreaking research while engaging with the disability community and with policymakers so that your research tackles problems that are of the real world and that your research can impact society and promote positive change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. We will now go on to your colleague, Teresa, to hear another colleague from Lisbon discuss her areas of interest in terms of postdoc supervision for this project. Over to you, Teresa.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor. And first of all, I'm very happy to be with you in the launch of this project with the Prepare project. So my name is Teresa Janela Pinto, and I'm also a professor at ISCSP University of Lisbon, where I teach in graduate and undergraduate programs in social policy and social work, and currently coordinate a master in social policy. My research is focused on comparative social policy, disability, and human rights, and my work is deeply rooted in this concern with bridging social policy research and real-world practice. I have collaborated with Paula for several years, and I am currently vice coordinator of the Disability and Human Rights Observatory, where I had a chance to research and lead projects on social protection, inclusive education, legal capacity reform, and rights-informed approaches to social policy analysis. I also conduct research on gender policy and intersectional approaches to social policy as part of my work as an integrated researcher in the Interdisciplinary Center for Gender Studies, also at the University of Lisbon. I am also a member of the International Foundation for Applied Disability Research, FIHA, since 2020, where I evaluate and support research applying disability studies to real-world contexts. So very focused on the production of actionable results and outputs to enact meaningful social change aligned with disability rights. And this background and experience informs my approach to research, which is very centered on interdisciplinary collaboration with a strong focus, of course, on social policy, but also with a wider scope of areas, policy relevance, and participatory research. And in line with this, in terms of my research interests and what we were looking forward to see in terms of this first call, it comes also from this concern that while international frameworks provide essential guidance for disability rights, their implementation requires navigating very complex national and transnational institutional arrangements, different policy instruments, different configurations of services. And this raises questions about governance, provision, and how to balance the role of different actors in ensuring accessibility, equity, and access to rights for disabled people. And as such, I'm very interested in the challenges that arise in this process of translating human rights commitments into practice, and also in the role of prefigurative politics and the involvement of disability movement and disabled people in shaping these transformations in welfare policies, especially in light of current global challenges connected with neoliberal economic policies, migrations, climate change, and many of the challenges that Eleanor had a chance to tell us about before. In terms of some of the areas that we would be interested in the University of Lisbon in this first call, so anything connected also with the how to navigate these new arrangements in terms of governance and reform of social services, with a focus on deinstitutionalization, independent living, and a balance between public, private, and civil society roles. Education and family policies, and namely examining how policies can support truly inclusive education in light of different experiences and models, and approaching caregiving, family policy, and family dynamics through a disability rights approach, which is not often the case. Very interested also in intersectional approaches to disability policy, including from a gender and life course perspective, and in comparative and participatory research methods. So if some of the proposals that you had in mind intersect with some or several of these issues, we would be interested in learning how that can be enabled and here at the University of Lisbon and within the work of the observatory. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you, Teresa. And now I will share in a moment a video from my colleague János Fiala-Butora at the University of Galway to hear his ideas about supervision. But first, I would like to remind our participants that we do have a Q&A box. So if you have questions based on what you've heard so far, please do take the opportunity to type your question into the Q&A box, and we will have dedicated time to answer questions towards the end of the webinar. So without further ado, we will now hear from my colleague János about his areas of interest for supervision.
Law with a focus on the UN. Welcome, everybody. My name is János Fiala-Butora. I'm a researcher at the Center for Disability Law and Policy at the University of Galway. And my main area of research is disability human rights law with a focus on the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But by background, I'm a human rights generalist. So at the moment, I'm very much interested in how disability rights get incorporated into international human rights law, how disability rights interact with other areas of human rights law, and in particularly how they affect international human rights mechanisms. So we know that the CRPD has a transformative effect not only on disability rights, but also on human rights law in more general. So I'm very much interested in how this plays out, what are the consequences, what we can say about this transformative effect. And at the moment, I'm looking at, I have a few research projects which look at how the CRPD gets into an interaction with the European Convention on Human Rights and other UN mechanisms, and how both are changed. I published an article which describes this in the area of mental health law. I'm working on another one which describes this in the area of the right to vote and legal capacity, and some others. So beyond this, I'm very much interested in several other areas of disability rights. I just finished a monograph on how to incorporate persons with severe disabilities, persons with high support needs in a support framework of legal capacity. I'm also developing a research project on how to transfer mental health law to comply with the UN CRPD. Within that, I'm at the moment writing an article on how to conceptualize autonomy and voluntariness under the CRPD. I also was very much interested in the right to vote, and I continue to work on that. But other areas of disability rights, inclusive education, accessibility, are also in my area of interest. I'm very much, in general, interested in how to understand exceptions under the CRPD and how to address exceptions. This is a central question for legal capacity and mental health law, but also freedom from torture, right to vote, and some others. This question of the exceptional person, a person with very severe disability, always comes up. And I think the CRPD has a very unique answer to this, different than existing human rights bodies. We just have to develop it better. And in an even more general sense, I'm interested in how international human rights law conceptualizes difference. So difference in terms of disability, but also other grounds, and in particular how disability, LGBT identity, and ethnic identity interact, and how are they addressed by human rights bodies. So I'm writing an article, I'm developing an article how the European Court of Human Rights handles this, and how the CRPD has a different approach to difference, and how it changes also all other human rights bodies should understand and approach difference. This is a central question for anti-discrimination law, but I think the implications go way beyond that. So at the moment, it seems I'm very much focused on the interaction between the CRPD and the human rights bodies, particularly the European Court of Human Rights. But my interest goes beyond that. That's just what I'm currently focusing on. But any area of disability law and international human rights law with a focus on disability is within my area of interest. So I'm very much looking forward to any postdoc researchers proposing topics in this area and discussing them further, developing them further. Thank you for your interest.
Okay, great. So it just falls to me as the remaining supervisor now to outline my own areas of interest for receiving proposals in this project. So much of my own research is in the area of legal capacity, reproductive freedom, access to justice, and disability advocacy. So I'm always interested in research proposals on these topics. But for this project, I'm especially interested in proposals that push the boundaries of what we know about these issues already, or consider maybe how the lines that we draw in the sand when it comes to disability might interact with or challenge the position of other social movements. So, for example, in reproductive freedom, we're in an era where abortion access in many different countries is being restricted. So how do we ensure that when proposals to make abortion access available only on specific grounds are made, that we don't validate problematic assumptions about the value of disabled people's lives? That's one area I'm quite interested in. Also, in the context of global demographic change, we hear a lot of discussion about a care agenda, investing in specific types of care or recognizing the role of carers in some way. These are ongoing in many different world regions, including in Europe. So what does this mean for the global disability movement's work on the right to live independently and be included in the community, and the right not to be institutionalized or subjected to forced treatment? And then finally, in an age where personhood is an ever-expanding concept, it's vested in corporations as well as in people, what does this mean for how we conceptualize things like legal agency and support to exercise legal capacity, especially when it comes to people with complex support needs? So that's just a very short overview of the areas that I'm interested in supervising proposals on. But as I say, if you have an area outside of this, please do also get in contact and discuss it with one of the proposed supervisors. So I'm going to move on to the next session of our webinar now, which is to introduce you to some of the secondment hosts. And there are others here that I can see in the webinar as well, which is great. But we're going to begin with our colleague Kaloyan Kamenov, who is at the World Health Organization, which is involved in the project through their research partnership with University of Lucerne. So we're going to hear from Kaloyan about some of WHO's research priorities over the timeline of this project that they would be particularly interesting in hosting researchers on secondment regarding. So we'll hear from Kaloyan now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kaloyan Kamenov. and I am a technical officer working for the disability program at WHO. I'm based in the headquarters office in Geneva, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with you. I have to apologize for not being able to join the meeting. There is a conflicting meeting that I have to attend, but I'm recording this video because we are very excited to be collaborating on this project, and we look forward for potential secondees that may come to WHO and work with us. Perhaps just to give a little bit of background information on what our program focuses on and what our work includes. So we very much look into supporting member states and partners to advance health equity for persons with disabilities. So we look at really persons with disabilities as a population group, and the fact that they are very often left behind when it comes to the health sector priorities. And this, of course, leads to some very negative consequences in terms of their health outcomes. We know, and we published a couple of years ago, a global report on health equity for persons with disabilities that looks into the health inequities that they experience, from premature mortality, sometimes up to 20 years compared to persons without disabilities, to a double risk of developing several health conditions like stroke, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, depression, sexually transmitted diseases, also some infectious diseases like TB, and of course more limitations in their functioning. So what we want to make sure is that the health system as a whole, and here I speak about, from governance, from policies, legislation, through financing, through workforce that is trained and has the competencies to address the needs of persons with disabilities. So data collection in the health sector, through availability and accessibility of medicines, diagnostics, medical products, through really the whole health system is inclusive of persons with disabilities. And we support countries in two ways. One is through developing normative guidance, standards and guidelines to make sure that this is implemented at country level. And then through a direct support to countries to really implement the recommendations that WHO is providing. So I mentioned already the global report that we published. After the report, we published also guidance that we call Guide for Action that really provides a step-by-step guidance to countries on how to make their health systems more inclusive. We are currently working and we are implementing this in a number of countries, this Guide for Action. We are also now developing a competency-based global standard on disability inclusion for health workforce that will really help the educational system in countries when it comes to medical education includes a curriculum on disability inclusion for medical students, and it also can be used, of course, for in-service training. We're also developing a range of different tools as well. For example, how to make medicines, diagnostics, medical products accessible. One of the probably interesting pieces for many of the secondees will be a global health policy and system research framework on disability inclusion that we're just starting now developing, and it will take a couple of years to be developed. So there are a range of different areas that we would welcome support from secondees to work with us to really support us in the development or in the implementation of some of these tools in countries. So yeah, it will really depend on the interest of course of potential individuals that want to work with WHO, but we're open to also adapt, to the requirements of the project. And yeah, I can just say that we are open for this collaboration and happy to welcome anyone who may be interested to work with us. So Eleanor, I know has already my email, but for anything we can be in touch, and I can answer any questions after this meeting. So thank you again, and looking forward to this collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaloyan. We're now going to hand over to Marion Steff from the European Disability Forum to hear about some of EDF's priority areas in the next few years in which you might welcome secondees from this project. Over to you, Marion.
Thank you, Eleanor. Yes, this is very exciting. I want to apply myself. So thank you for the invitation to have the European Disability Forum here. I'm the International Cooperation Manager, and we had the pleasure to have 2 postdoc researchers in the past with the DARE project. Aoife and Claudia, they were fantastic, and we both, like EDF and the researcher, we all learned from each other. So that was it was very good to have them with us. We are based in Belgium. So to give you maybe some ideas or where we need some help, let me give you a bit of the picture for the big picture for 2025. We have a new European Commission College and the new European Parliament. We have to say that 1/3 of the European Parliament is from the far right. And then we have also people with disabilities from the movement that are from the far right, which is something that is becoming a bit new from us. And then in Belgium, the anti-NGO movement is becoming a bit stronger. So in other words, the environment we are in is changing and it's becoming challenging. Saying that, we are quite optimistic with the Polish and the Danish presidency of the EU that's going to be happening. And then it's important to mention that the EU is working on a new budget. They have the consultation happening. So that's something that is very high on the list in our interest for EDF. And of course, financing for development, again, in a new political and global context, when we see that, for instance, US aid is making a massive cut around the world, is that how can we finance our work concretely and making sure that people with disability, organization of persons with disability are supported throughout the world. Something that's very high on the agenda is also the European Disability Rights Strategy 2021-2030. So we are now entering a new phase. It means that the strategy is currently being updated by the European Commission, and we're trying to influence the different flagship initiatives that's going to happen in that strategy. EDF is also advocating for a new disability action plan in external action. So to explain briefly, there's a gender action plan in EU work. There's a youth action plan. There's also a youth strategy, a gender strategy, but there's no disability action plan in external action. So we have been told that there's enough strategy and that's not needed. And of course, we disagree. We want to see more work in the world done by the EU. Important to mention that the EU is currently being reviewed by the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And actually next week, there's this dialogue that's going to take place between the UN committee expert and the EU officials. So we've been trying to influence the content of that review. And then also some of you, I might see some of you in a month at the Global Disability Summit, where any stakeholders have been asked to make commitments to promote disability inclusion. So we submitted to the EU a list of proposed commitments, but it's important to follow up on those commitments. What's happening next when, you know, countries, I don't know, researchers, universities, foundation, donors make commitments, and so what? I would like to mention something that's already been mentioned earlier is climate change. We have been advocating for disability inclusive climate policy at the national level, at the EU level, at the global level. And we want to make sure that in climate action, accessibility, transport infrastructures, consumer choice is included. So we have a socially just green transition. You will know that the COP, so the climate conference, will be in Brazil at the end of the year, and then we really trying to influence the UNFCCC, which is the UN agency working on climate, to really now officially recognize person with disability as a constituency. That's something we've been working very hard with some colleagues actually based in Ireland, CBM Ireland, CBM Global, but other colleagues around the world. Let me see if anything else on climate. Yes, I could also just say that we're starting a new project related to accessible building and energy performance. And then we also applying to become a member of the Climate Action Network Europe. So lots of things that can be done around climate, and it's very interesting. I'm going to mention 2 more topics, Eleonor. Is that okay, or in terms of time?
Just briefly, if you can.
Briefly.
We're running out of time, so quite
okay. Briefly. So quickly, refugees immigration is a very important topic for us as well, something where we need to start to raise a bit more awareness. We are working with different network, like the Council on Refugees and Exile, the platform focusing on undocumented migrants, etc. We've been inputting our concert in the EU Pact on migration and asylum, etc. So this is something that we really wanted to see progress on, because it's very challenging. It's a complex topic. And the second topic, the last topic I wanted to mention, is related to conflict and peace building. We have a program in Ukraine with our partners and members, organization of persons with disabilities. So of course, we advocating for humanitarian action to be inclusive of persons with disabilities, etc. But I see we have Julia from Fight for Rights who's be there, so she might want to talk about it more. But wars is an important topic when we could have some help from researchers. Thank you.
excellent. Thank you so much, Marion. Great to hear those suggestions for secondment topics. And now we are going straight to Julia next to hear about Fight for Right. Oh, sorry, I'm wrong about that. I think I've undermined my own agenda. We're actually going to Maria Ní Laharta from Disability Rights Fund. And then after that, we will be hearing from Julia about Fight for Right in Ukraine and your priorities for secondment. But first to Maria Ní Laharta to hear about the Disability Rights Fund's areas of interest for secondment.
The power of the disability rights movement globally to ensure that disability rights are for everyone, everywhere. And a little bit about DRF as an organisation. We our birth is linked to this CRPD, with the recognition that nothing about us without us necessitated support for movements in order for movements to be able to grow, to flourish, that movements couldn't exist and run and be inclusive of like air and good vibes. This actually required significant resourcing and support. As a result, for 15 years, DRF has been a grant maker and a participatory grant maker all over the world, predominantly in the global south, to ensure that movements had the resources that they and support that they need in order to be able to unleash their power and to kind of celebrate that diversity. As an organization, we are very much rooted in the diversity of our community, in everything that that means. We're focused on that participation and access and inclusion. We're unapologetically feminist, and we apply an intersectional approach to our work. And we really build on our relationships and learning, peer learning and collaboration and that solidarity, and create spaces for us to be together as a movement whenever we have the opportunity. We really believe in kind of unleashing the power of disability movements, but that includes through recognizing the need for support and direct support for disability movements, the need for peer learning, the need to open spaces for the disability movement to advocate, and that includes recognizing that disabled people need to be supported to or enabled to advocate at all levels, but also within movements that haven't necessarily focused or centered disability previously. Within that, there's a couple of acknowledgements. One, we have a number of cross-cutting priorities, which includes kind of recognizing the need to advance racial justice and gender justice, the need for solidarity with Indigenous peoples and rainbow communities, an increased focus on youth rights, but also a focus on economic justice and climate justice. There's a recognition within our strategic plan that we are in a time of polycrisis, and that as a movement globally, and particularly within the global south, we need to be in a position to respond and engage with emerging issues, that as we face pandemics and climate crisis and conflict and economic crisis, that this is something that we need disabled people or people with disabilities to be able to lead and contribute to solving these global crises, or the vision for disability rights for everyone everywhere becomes impossible. So it's an incredibly exciting organization, and grantees are some of the most incredible organizations on the planet who have done amazing things. And if you get a chance to work with DRF, do.
Great. Thanks to Maria for that overview of DRF's work. And now we are coming to Yulia Sachuk from Fight for Right Ukraine to hear about your areas of interest for researchers on secondment. Over to you, Yulia.
Hello, everyone, and nice to be here, and greetings from Zero Conference, which is happening now in Vienna. As a Fight for Right, we are a disability-founded, disability-led organization, actually women with disabilities, and we work in 3 main areas. First of all, it's disability advocacy. And here we are helping our Ukrainian authorities to implement CRPD, and now during the EU accession to build this process and to make it more disability inclusive. So here we will be interested in any support and regarding how to build this process, because it's not only about access formal, but also about meaningful participation for organizations of people with disabilities and for disability activists. And from there also we are focused very much on disability leadership and also on disability-led organizations of people with disabilities, and to understand more situation which we have now, because we have some definitions from CRPD, and at the same time we see that especially local organizations of people with disabilities don't have enough access, and also about at the same time, we see how disability or even persons with disabilities used for, as we call it, maybe a little bit radical, but disability washing, and it's happening in many businesses and also in civil society as well. With this regarding EU accession, we are really interested in employment area and reasonable accommodation and implementation during the EU accession process at the national level. The second, our activity and priority for now is providing support and safety for people with disabilities during the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And here a lot of areas for researching, beginning from the participation and inclusive humanitarian support, and also disability war crimes, access of people with disabilities for and inclusion during the peace building processes, and a lot of interesting topics. Here we can provide our experience, because we built, and all these 3 years we are managing disability-led emergency and humanitarian response. We built it by ourselves, step by step, and most of our team are people with disabilities. So here accent will be on, again, meaningful participation, and not only when we are talking about international humanitarian law from the position of victims and people who needs help, but also as participants and actors in international humanitarian actions. We went long way to be present here, and even to become partners to Ukrainian Humanitarian Fund, where Fight for Right became the first organization of people with disabilities Ukrainian. It was really difficult. So we, I think this research will be interesting for future building preparedness mechanisms in conflict areas during different types of emergencies and etc. Because as we see for now, disability presence and representation should be on all stages during when we are talking about international humanitarian actions. And also the third, our activities and priority for now is deinstitutionalization in Ukraine. And here we have all scope of, again, interesting topics such as legal capacity, such as not segregated services, especially long-term care services, independent living in the communities, and what is more important, again, attention on the conditions in which our country is doing this. So we are doing this during the war, and here we also see a lot of influence of conditions, war conditions on different again, areas. If we talk about institutionalization, for example, we see that many refugees and internally displaced people, temporary accommodations now are becoming for them institutions. We see that institutions become more common, usual way for veterans after the rehabilitation. So to prevent this, we need more, again, information, knowledge, and also gender aspect of influence of the war, because again,
Yeah.
there are no a
We're
lot of evidences. So yeah, so I think there's three priorities, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julia. We only have a few minutes left in our time, so I propose now to go immediately to the questions we have received, and I'm going to answer those now. We do have an online guide to how to use our application system on the project website, which has been posted in the chat project website, and please contact us by email if you have any other questions. So I propose I'll answer the question starting with the first question about the countries. So question is about whether new destinations besides Ireland, Switzerland and Portugal will be added for the second call next year. So there will not be any new employing organizations. The second call in 2026 will also be based for fellows in Ireland, Portugal and Switzerland will be the employing countries, and the mobility criteria I described before applies. There is a question about whether, considering mobility issues for disabled researchers, is it mandatory to move abroad for the 3 years, or is online collaboration with occasional travel an option? So the EU is very strict about this, and it does require all researchers, including disabled researchers, to move. However, the EU also has particular funding streams available for additional costs that disabled researchers face in their work and in terms of their mobility as well. So this is something that we can discuss with any applicants, and we particularly want to encourage disabled applicants and researchers at risk, so researchers who are coming from situations of conflict, for example, to be able to apply, and we will work really hard with everyone to make sure people can apply. I have a question about whether a PhD is necessary and what to do if you don't have one. So unfortunately, again, the EU rules are very clear on this. So we must have the PhD degree in order to apply, as this is a postdoctoral research network. Even if someone has a really exciting research idea, but they don't have the PhD research qualification, then unfortunately they cannot apply for a fellowship in the project. However, the project will have a number of training events throughout the 5 years, and we would have certain aspects of those training events open to the public. So there will be opportunities for people to join us, to share what they're working on, to hear about what our researchers are doing, and so on. There's a question about whether data will be available about the people attempting to put in research proposals. So again, we will report to the EU on a certain number of criteria about the types of applications that we receive. So particularly looking at things like gender breakdown, a number of researchers with disabilities applying, and so on. And then the researchers will be making all of their research outputs public as part of the prepared process. So there will be opportunities to learn more about what the researchers are doing and get involved. And finally, there is a question about whether the research proposal can be applicable to the African continent as a comparative analysis, and absolutely. So this is a European funded project, and the employing organizations are in Europe, but the research is not limited to Europe in scope. So you can research on whatever country or context, and many of my colleagues have talked about how interested they are in receiving proposals that relate to the Global South. So do please consider applying for those issues and discuss with your proposed supervisors where the geographic scope of your research should be based. We've also received a question about whether the recording will be made available of this webinar, and it will. We will post it on our YouTube, and whether we will circulate news about the project and vacancies to our researchers from previous Marie Curie ITNs like DARE and DREAM. We absolutely will do that as well. And I've also had a comment from, I know that we do have someone from CBM, for example, in attendance, and that they are a secondment organization in this project too. I'm particularly interested in receiving secondment researchers on climate justice as well. So with that, we've reached the end of our allotted time, and I want to thank our interpreters and captioner for today for making this webinar accessible, as well as all of our speakers and panelists today, including the supervisors and secondment organizations. Please do not hesitate to get in touch with us if you have any questions about applying or how to do so, or your proposal ideas. We're really happy to take those questions by email. Thanks to everyone, and looking forward to starting work on this project with you all. Thanks again.